It's really nice to be here today. So I'm going to be presenting some of our new data on consumer perceptions about low-calorie sweeteners and how this affects people's food-related behaviours and their energy intake. And this research has been conducted with my PhD student, Niamh Maloney, who's in the audience today. Ooh. Okay, so we've heard a lot this morning from the excellent presentations about trends in low-calorie sweetener consumption, and also some of the controversies and scepticism that is associated with low-calorie sweeteners. So in particular, there is a real concern about their use in weight management, that they might stimulate appetite, promote preference for sweet-tasting foods, and ultimately lead to weight gain. And a lot of this is really born out of the common observation that often people who are consuming low-calorie sweetened products, such as diet beverages, will be people who have a higher body weight. This has been picked up, for example, by Donald Trump when he tweeted he'd never seen a thin person drinking Diet Coke. But of course, just because two things occur together, it doesn't mean that one causes the other. Correlation does not equal causality. And we've already heard a lot today from Adam and from John about this issue of reverse causality, and it's entirely plausible that individuals who have a higher body weight are using low-calorie sweeteners in response to their body weight as a weight control strategy. So I'm just going to very briefly mention the meta-analysis conducted by Peter Rogers and colleagues, because John has just given us a really excellent overview. But the conclusions of this work are entirely consistent with the reverse causality idea. So they found that the preponderance of evidence from human randomized controlled trials indicated that low-calorie sweeteners do not increase energy intake or body weight. And it's really important that they included randomized controlled trials, because as we know, this is one of the highest levels of evidence, as John showed us. And in fact, the overall balance of evidence from this analysis indicated that use of low-calorie sweeteners in place of sugar led to reduced energy intake and body weight in children and in adults. So looking then a bit more at the evidence that low-calorie sweeteners might be being used by consumers as a weight control strategy. So Adam already spoke very nicely about this morning. So just a couple of other studies to add to that. So Appleton and Connor compared individuals who were frequent consumers of low-calorie sweetened beverages to non-consumers, and they found that frequent consumers did indeed have a higher body weight, but they also had stronger concerns about their weight than non-consumers and were more motivated to try and reduce their calorie intake. And then Catenacci et al. Studied members of the National Weight Control Registry. So this is from the US, and these are individuals who have successfully lost and maintained weight loss over time. So they're a very interesting group to study. And this found that just over half of these individuals were regularly consuming low-calorie sweetened beverages. And then the majority of people who consumed them believed that they did help to control total calorie intake. So given that people who are consuming low-calorie sweetened beverages frequently are often dieters, it's important to think a little bit more about the psychology of dieting and what might be going on there. And an influential theory in this area is the goal conflict theory. So according to this model, chronic dieters are juggling two conflicting goals. So on the one hand, there is the goal of hedonic eating. So this is a goal to eat enjoyable, nice-tasting foods and or beverages. But then there is also a goal to maintain one's diet and to control one's weight. And the problem is that these two goals will often conflict, because it is often the case that foods which are designed for dieters, which are low calorie, will often not be so nice tasting, whereas the nice tasting foods will often tend to be high in calories. So the idea is that dieters are always having to compromise in relation to this conflict. So this is where low-calorie sweetened beverages could be really, really helpful because they deliver sweetness. And sweetness is highly palatable, but importantly, they don't contain the calories. So one idea is that low-calorie sweetened beverages might be particularly helpful for dieters because they are helping them to align these previously conflicting goals. So they are enabling people to still fulfill their goal of hedonic eating by consuming nice, sweet-tasting products, but while also maintaining their goals for successful weight control. So in our research, we've been trying to test this idea in various different ways. So the first way we set about this was to simply ask people in order to quantify their beliefs and attitudes about low-calorie sweetened beverages. So in this study, we devised a questionnaire because there was no existing tool in order to measure specific beliefs and attitudes about low-calorie sweetened beverages. And we compared frequent consumers of low-calorie sweetened beverages with individuals who didn't consume them and were non-consumers. And we found that there were two key differences between these groups of consumers. So the frequent consumers had significantly higher beliefs that low-calorie sweetened beverages were enjoyable and palatable relative to the non-consumers. And they were also more likely to believe that low-calorie sweetened beverages were effective in controlling appetite and weight, again, relative to the non-consumers. So this just gives you a bit of descriptive information about the participants in this study. So we had just over 200 participants, roughly equal numbers of frequent consumers and non-consumers. And so consistent with the other studies, we did find that frequent consumers had a higher BMI, but what we also found was that they were higher on dietary restraint and higher on body weight concerns compared to non-consumers. We also, in this study, asked our participants just to give us some free text responses about their beliefs about low-calorie sweetened beverages and why they were consuming them. So firstly, these are some typical responses from the frequent consumers. So they were saying things like, well, they're low in calories but can still taste nice, therefore you can enjoy them without the guilt. So this kind of fits in with the goal conflict idea really well, because this person's saying, well, I can still fulfill my weight goal, but I'm still getting that nice taste and I'm not feeling guilty. And I think this issue of guilt is really, really important, and I'm going to come back to that a bit later in my presentation. But yeah, talking about keeping hunger at bay, helping to lose weight, and the one down the bottom saying this is a really easy way to cut out unwanted calories. Again, I think that's important because weight loss and weight maintenance is really, really hard. Dieting is hard. So if we can recommend easy strategies to people that can be used, and that's going to be useful. But then when we look at the non-consumers, we see a really, really different picture. So that one, carcinogenic, just keeps coming out, this idea that they cause cancer, stigma, negative connotations. Someone saying there, I think they're unhealthy, I think they're addictive. And then down the bottom, we have the older natural products fallacy, which is the idea that they're not natural, they're artificial, so therefore they're not going to be as healthy as something that is natural. So just to summarise the results of this first study, so we found evidence that frequent consumers appear to associate low-calorie sweetened beverages with pleasure and also with positive health features, and this specifically related to their ability to satisfy hunger and food craving and to help people to maintain their dieting and weight goals. But we found that non-frequent consumers do not share these beliefs. And so a potential interpretation is that low-calorie sweetened beverages might be helping consumers to align these potentially conflicting goals around hedonic eating and successful weight control. So we wanted to follow up more on this idea that people might be using low-calorie sweetened beverages as a specific strategy to control their food cravings and intake. So this was something which came out of our first study, was that people were saying, when I'm craving something sweet, then I will have a low-calorie sweetened beverage and that will help to satisfy my food cravings. So we wanted to put this to the test, and so we've devised an experimental protocol which I will walk you through, and then I will show you some of our results. So the way we do this is we invite participants into our eating laboratory at the University of Liverpool. In this particular study, we recruited participants who were either frequent consumers of low-calorie sweetened beverages or non-consumers. And then half of these participants were exposed to a chocolate craving manipulation. So these participants had to select a bar of chocolate, they had to unwrap it, intensively smell it, and imagine eating it. But they weren't allowed to eat it. And just to say as well, we'd pre-screened all these people, so these were people who did really like chocolate, and we made them do that for 2 minutes, which is very mean. And then we had a control condition where they had to do the same thing, but with wooden blocks. So the idea here was that in one of our conditions, we would experimentally induce a craving for chocolate, but not in the control condition. And then a short time after we'd done that, we then gave our participants ad libitum access to a lot of savoury snack foods and also beverages. And we did this under the guise that we'd ask the participants to abstain from eating, and so therefore we couldn't send them away without having eaten lunch. So here was a nice lunch for them to eat. And this lunch also included beverages, so the participant could choose sugar-sweetened beverages, low-calorie sweetened beverages, and water, and everything was clearly labelled so they knew what they were having. But then, of course, we covertly weighed everything before or after so we could measure how many calories the participants were consuming in this ad libitum eating context. So our hypotheses. So we know from a lot of research in appetite control that if we pre-expose people to palatable food cues like chocolate, when they are then given the opportunity to consume, people will tend to overeat. And that's because when you're exposed to a nice tasting food, it triggers a desire to eat that food and you start to feel like, oh, I really, really want to eat something nice. And then when you're given the opportunity to, we do quite reliably see increased energy intake. So we were expecting that our non-consumers would show greater energy intake in the chocolate craving condition relative to the consumers who were in the control condition, replicating that well-established effect. But our hypothesis about the frequent consumers of low-calorie sweetened beverages was that they would be protected from this effect, because our idea was these individuals would be using the low-calorie sweetened beverages as a way of satisfying their food craving and thereby reducing overconsumption. So first of all, this just shows you the levels of craving in the two different conditions. And so what we found here was that there wasn't a difference at baseline. Then as soon as we'd done the craving manipulation, we could see that craving in the craving group, who are in the red, was significantly higher. And importantly, those levels of high craving were maintained to just before the ad libitum snack intake, so just before they ate the food. The participants who'd had the chocolate craving manipulation were significantly craving chocolate, whereas the control group who were exposed to the wooden blocks were not. So just important to establish that, first of all, the manipulation was effective, and it was equally effective in the frequent and non-consumers of the low-calorie sweetened beverages. So in terms of then what they actually ate when they had the opportunity to, so we found an interesting effect here which was consistent with our hypothesis. So you've got the craving conditions in red, the control condition is blue, and you've got the non-consumers on the right and the frequent consumers on the left. And you can see that the non-consumers consume significantly more food in the craving condition compared to the control condition, as we would expect. Very interestingly here, we did not see that effect in the frequent consumers of low-calorie sweetened beverages. They consumed a similar amount in both conditions. So in terms of why this might be, we did break it down and we looked at sweet versus savoury foods, and we didn't see any difference there. But when we looked at their beverage intake, we did see an effect there of consumer group. So this just shows you the millilitres of beverages consumed by the different beverage types. And there was a clear effect there of consumer group. So the frequent consumers were consuming significantly more low-calorie sweetened beverages than the non-consumers, who in fact didn't consume any at all. The non-consumers were going for sugar-sweetened beverages or water. So this wasn't affected by the craving manipulation, but we're just seeing this very clear preference that the frequent consumers are consuming these beverages, the non-consumers are not. So just to summarise the result from that first study was that we didn't find any difference in energy intake between the craving and control conditions in the frequent low-calorie sweetened beverage consumers. And one possible explanation for this is that their consumption of low-calorie sweetened beverages might have satisfied their food craving. So we've established that these individuals did consume low-calorie sweetened beverages in that ad libitum context, so perhaps those beverages were satisfying their food cravings. So to take this further, we wanted to directly test that idea that it's all about availability of low-calorie sweetened beverages. So we decided to run a very similar study, but this time we would look and see what happens when the low-calorie sweetened beverages are not available. So it was a very similar protocol in this second study, except we only recruited frequent low-calorie sweetened consumers. We didn't have the non-consumer group in this study. But it was the same again, so half were exposed to the chocolate, half were exposed to the wooden blocks. And then they were given ad libitum access to the sweet and savoury high-calorie snacks and beverages. But here we added another twist. So in one condition, low-calorie sweetened beverages were available, along with water and sugar-sweetened beverages. But then in another condition, the low-calorie sweetened beverages were not there, and the participant only had access to water or sugar-sweetened beverages, but all the other foods were the same. So our idea here was that in the condition where the low-calorie sweetened beverages are unavailable, we were expecting our participants to show increased consumption in the craving relative to the control condition. But in the condition where they were available, we were expecting to see that protective effect. So in terms of what we found, we actually didn't find that. So we found a different finding to what we'd found in the first study. So we found a main effect of craving. So energy intake was significantly higher in the craving compared to the control condition. But importantly, that didn't matter whether low-calorie sweetened beverages were available or unavailable. So essentially, we didn't find an interaction between craving condition and availability of the beverages. So that went against our hypothesis. But what we did find, which was interesting, was that we found a significant main effect of availability of low-calorie sweetened beverages. So what that means is that intake was significantly higher when low-calorie sweetened beverages were unavailable compared to when they were available. So that's just if you look at the bars on this side here, you can see that overall intake is higher in the unavailable condition compared to the available condition. And that's, again, regardless of whether people were in the craving or the control condition. So in this second study, we were also interested in some of the cognitions and psychological experience, I guess, that goes with eating. So we were interested in guilt, and we were also interested in kind of how in control participants felt over their eating and how this would be affected both by craving and the availability of low-calorie sweetened beverages. And again, we found some really interesting results here. So at the top there is how in control people felt over their food intake, so like their self-efficacy. And we found an effect here whereby when low-calorie sweetened beverages were available, participants felt that they were more in control of their eating compared to when they were not available. And then down the bottom there, you've got guilt. So when low-calorie sweetened beverages were unavailable, participants felt significantly more guilty about their food intake compared to when the beverages were available. And for guilt, we also saw an effect there of craving, whereby guilt was higher in the craving relative to the control. And that would be expected given the greater energy intake. So then just to summarise the results of those studies, so in that second study, we didn't replicate the first study, so low-calorie sweetened beverages did not appear to protect consumers from craving-induced increases in food consumption. However, we did find that overall energy intake was significantly higher when low-calorie sweetened beverages were unavailable compared to when they were available. And then we also found as well that participants felt more guilty and less in control of their food intake when low-calorie sweetened beverages were unavailable. And I think that that is a really important finding because we know in the context of weight management that guilt and negative emotions like that are really counterproductive. So if people kind of feel they're not doing well with their diet and if they kind of start to feel a failure and might kind of start beating themselves up, then this is really counterproductive and can lead to problematic eating behaviours. So anything that can help to make people sort of feel better and more positive in this context is likely to be of benefit. So just to conclude, I guess sort of take-home messages from our research. So we've devised a questionnaire to measure people's beliefs and attitudes about low-calorie sweetened beverages, and we found that having positive beliefs about their palatability and also about their efficacy in relation to appetite control are key determinants of low-calorie sweetened beverage consumption. And we've also provided some evidence that low-calorie sweetened beverages might be helping consumers to control their energy intake, whilst also reducing negative psychological states associated with eating. So just in terms of where we should take all of this, so our data and lots of other evidence out there does clearly indicate that beliefs about low-calorie sweetened beverages are polarised. So if we want to be thinking about ways to increase uptake, then it's really important that we work out how we can change people's attitudes and foster more positive attitudes towards these products. We also need more research on the longer-term effects of low-calorie sweetened beverages in the context of weight management, and we need to know more about the underpinning physiological and psychological mechanisms. So this is a trial that we're currently running on at the University of Liverpool. So we're a few years in now, but we're looking at comparing the effects of low-calorie sweetened beverages relative to water in the context of weight management. But in this study, we've got a significant follow-up period. So we are going to be able to address these questions about the longer-term effects of low-calorie sweetened beverages in weight management. And finally, we're also just embarking on a new Horizon 2020 project. So this is the SWEET project, which is looking at sweeteners and sweetness enhancers in relation to health, obesity, safety and sustainability. So, and this is a 5-year project. It's being led by the University of Liverpool, but it involves 28 partners from across Europe, a number of whom are here today. And so our key objectives in this project are to identify and address the barriers and facilitators to the use of sweeteners. And we're also going to be examining risks and benefits of using sweeteners to replace sugar in the context of health, obesity, safety and sustainability. So finally, I just want to acknowledge Neve, who's done all this work. So feel free to grab her in the lunch break if you have questions. And I'd also like to acknowledge my colleagues and collaborators at Liverpool and elsewhere. And the research is funded by the American Beverage Association. Thank you.